Imagine a plague that doesn't give you a fever, but an unstoppable urge to dance. Now imagine it taking over an entire city, with hundreds of people dancing day and night, without any rest. They dance until their bodies literally break down, until they collapse, and in some cases, until their hearts just stop. This isn't a horror movie plot. This actually happened. In the summer of 1518, the city of Strasbourg was hit by one of the strangest events in human history, the dancing plague. For 2 solid months, its citizens were gripped by an urge they couldn't fight and a dance they couldn't stop. What could possibly possess hundreds of people and turn a city into a real-life dance of death? The search for an answer pulls us into a world of desperation, wild beliefs, and the unbelievable power of the human mind. It all started in mid-July 1518 with just one person. A woman named Frau Trophia walked out of her house onto a cobblestone street and just started dancing. No music, no party. She just danced. Her husband begged her to stop, but she couldn't. Neighbors stared, first curious, then horrified, as she kept going for hours, her body jerking around like a puppet. She would dance until she passed out from exhaustion, only to get up a few hours later and start her frantic performance all over again. By the end of that week, over 30 other people had joined her. A month later, that number exploded to around 400, and they weren't having fun. They were suffering. They danced until their feet were bloody, until they were drenched in sweat, and until, one by one, they started dying from strokes, heart attacks, and pure exhaustion. This was the dancing plague, and it's still one of history's most bizarre and chilling mysteries. So, what could make hundreds of people literally dance themselves to death? Let's go back to that hot July day. Picture the scene. Strasbourg, 1518. It's a busy city, full of merchants, cathedrals, and very strong traditions. Frau Trophia steps out of her house into the bright summer sun and starts to move. It's not a happy dance. Historical accounts say her movements were wild and uncontrolled, with her arms flailing and her body swaying. For the first day, people probably thought she was just a local weirdo or someone looking for attention. Her husband must have been mortified, pleading with her to come back inside. But she was totally locked and trapped in a world of nonstop motion. As the days went on, people got scared. This wasn't normal. She didn't eat, barely drank, and only rested when she collapsed in a dead faint. Even then, her legs would twitch, like the dance was still trying to get out. Crowds started gathering to watch. What started as one woman's private tragedy was turning into a public spectacle. People whispered, pointing at the woman who couldn't stop moving. Was she possessed by a demon? Did she have some new, terrifying disease? It was both captivating and horrifying. By the 4th day, as she danced on raw, bleeding feet, something snapped. Someone in the crowd started to twitch. Then another. They began copying her movements, not to make fun of her, but as if they had caught the same invisible sickness. The plague was spreading. Just imagine the sounds of Strasbourg. Not silence, but the constant horrifying slap of hundreds of feet on cobblestone, mixed with desperate gasps for air, cries of pain from the dancers, and shouts from their families trying to snap them out of it. The dancers' faces were blank, their eyes staring at nothing, even as their bodies went through this brutal, day-so-long marathon. The physical toll was insane. They danced under the blazing summer sun, getting severely dehydrated. Their feet, whether in shoes or bare, were worn down to bloody stumps. Chroniclers at the time wrote about people collapsing from exhaustion, only to get up and rejoin the frenzy. And then came death. We don't have exact numbers, but some historical sources claimed that at the plague's peak, as many as 15 people were dying each day. It's important to note, however, that official city records from the time don't mention any deaths, so the true number is unknown and might have been much lower. They were dying from heart attacks, strokes, and the total system failure that comes from pushing your body way past its limits. The city's leaders, the wealthy officials who ran Strasbourg, were in a total panic. The city was paralyzed, business stopped. The streets were no longer for travel. They were chaotic stages for a dance of death. They had to do something, and what they chose to do is maybe the wildest part of this whole story. Facing a crisis they could not understand, the city council turned to the so-called medical experts. In the 16th century, medicine was all about the four humors, the idea that your body's fluids determined your health. The doctors of Strasbourg diagnosed the dancers with hot blood. Their blood had supposedly gotten too hot, causing them to go into this manic state. Their cure was, by today's standards, a complete disaster. They figured the only way to get rid of the hot blood was for the dancers to just dance it out of their system. So, the authorities made the insane decision not to stop the dancing, but to encourage it. They went all in. They cleared out the city's large guild halls for the dancers. When those filled up, they built a giant wooden stage in the middle of the town's market square. But they didn't stop there. To make sure the dancers kept moving to the curative rhythm, the council hired professional musicians to play upbeat music. They even encouraged healthy people to dance with the sick, to hold them up when they got tired and keep them moving. What was meant to be a medical cure turned into a grotesque festival. The music and the stage probably just made the mania worse, creating an environment that fed the trance-like state of the dancers. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. More people got sucked into the frenzy. The scene must have been hellish, a sprawling, writhing mob of people, driven by some unseen force to the relentless beat of drums, literally dancing until they dropped dead. As the death toll rose, the authorities were forced to face the fact that they had no idea what they were doing and had made a terrible mistake. With the more dancing cure clearly failing, the city leaders panicked and changed their strategy. The hot blood theory was a total bust. The musicians were fired, and public dancing was banned. They needed a new explanation. So what was really going on for 500 years? This question has fascinated everyone. To solve the mystery, we have to look at the world of 1518, a world of deep faith and even deeper fear. The first explanation for the people of Strasbourg was supernatural. In a world where religion and superstition were everything, something this bizarre had to be the work of a higher power. They believed they were cursed by a saint, Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was a Christian martyr from the 4th century who, by the Middle Ages, was associated with neurological problems, especially ones involving twitching and involuntary movements. There was a popular belief that if you angered Saint Vitus, he could punish you with an uncontrollable urge to dance. In fact, this kind of dancing mania was often called Saint Vitus's dance. For the terrified people of Strasbourg, this seemed like the only logical answer. They had sinned, and this was their divine punishment. So, after failing with medicine, they turned to religion. They rounded up the remaining dancers, took them to a mountaintop shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, and performed a bunch of religious rituals to calm the angry saint. Priests put red shoes on the dancers' feet, sprinkled them with holy water, and had them hold small crosses while chanting prayers. This wasn't a medical problem anymore. It was a spiritual battle. Centuries later, science offered a new, mind-blowing theory. The dancers weren't cursed. They were poisoned. Specifically, they might have been victims of something called ergotism. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, which was a main food source in 16th century Europe. When you grind that moldy rye into flour and bake it into bread, the people who eat it can suffer from ergotism. The fungus contains powerful psychoactive chemicals that are chemically similar to LSD. On the surface, this theory seems to fit perfectly. Ergot poisoning can cause severe muscle spasms, twitching, and intense hallucinations. The idea that a whole town, already suffering from famine and eating bad quality bread, could have been poisoned seems. But when you look closer, the theory starts to fall apart. First, while ergotism causes muscle spasms, it's extremely unlikely to make people perform coordinated, rhythmic dancing for days on end. The movements from ergot poisoning are usually just jerky and uncontrolled. Second, a major symptom of ergotism is that it cuts off blood flow to your hands and feet, often leading to gangrene. The idea that people with this condition could dance for a week is just not medically believable. They'd be in too much pain to even stand. Finally, if it was a mass poisoning from a bad batch of bread, you'd expect whole families to get sick at the same time. But the dancing plague spread from person to person over weeks, more like a social contagion than a biological one. For these reasons, most historians now agree that the poison wasn't in their bread, but in their minds. This brings us to the theory that most experts accept today: mass psychogenic illness, or what's more commonly known as mass hysteria. This theory says the dancing plague wasn't caused by a curse or a poison, but by the mind itself. It was a psychic epidemic, a massive, collective stress response from a community that had been pushed to its absolute limit. To get this, you have to understand the insane levels of misery and anxiety in Strasbourg in 1518, according to historian John Waller, a leading expert on this topic. The city was a psychological pressure cooker just waiting to explode. The people of Strasbourg were dealing with a perfect storm of disasters. First, there was famine. Bad harvests led to extreme food shortages, and the poor were starving. People were eating things like bark and roots just to survive. Then there was disease. Old diseases like leprosy and the plague were constant threats, and new ones like syphilis and the English sweating sickness were terrifying people. Death was an everyday reality. On top of all that physical suffering was a massive dose of spiritual anxiety. People were terrified that the world was ending and that God was about to pass his final judgment. Then, into this perfect storm of fear, famine, and disease, Frau Trophia started dancing. The widespread belief in the curse of St. Vitus gave people a script for their unbearable stress. When they saw Frau Trophia, their terrified minds jumped to the conclusion that she was cursed. And because they believed in the curse so strongly, they became vulnerable to it themselves. In a state of extreme stress, the human mind can enter a trance where you lose conscious control of your body. The dancers weren't faking it. Their brains, overwhelmed by trauma and fear, triggered a very real physical reaction. It was a mental contagion. Every new person who joined the dance was just more proof that the curse was real, which pulled even more people into the trance. The authorities' terrible decision to build a stage and hire musicians only legitimized the whole thing, making the mass hysteria even more intense. The mania that gripped Strasbourg for 2 months finally faded as mysteriously as it had appeared. After the disastrous attempt to cure the plague with more dancing, the authorities completely switched gears. They banned all public music and dancing and sent the remaining dancers to the shrine of St. Vitus. It seems the religious rituals at the shrine may have had a powerful effect. In a community that believed an angry saint caused their suffering, the idea that they were now getting a divine cure was incredibly powerful. It gave them a story for their recovery. The curse was being lifted. Whether it was a placebo effect, pure exhaustion, or something else, the dancing gradually stopped. By early September, the streets of Strasbourg were finally quiet. The plague was over, but it left behind a traumatized city and one of history's greatest mysteries. The final death toll is still debated, but the event was so shocking it was recorded in countless city documents, ensuring the story would never be forgotten. The dancing plague of 1518 is a chilling example of the mind's power and the massive impact of psychological stress. While we can never be 100% sure what happened, the theory of mass psychogenic illness provides the most convincing explanation. It wasn't a demon or a poison. It was the human mind pushed beyond its breaking point, expressing its trauma in the only way it knew how, a tragic and bizarre dance of despair. From Frau Trophia's first strange steps to the collapse of the last dancer, the story of the 1518 dancing plague is one of history's wildest chapters. It's a haunting reminder that the line between sanity and madness can be razor thin. For 2 months, a city was held hostage not by an army, but by an idea, a shared belief that took on a life of its own with deadly results. But what do you think really happened in Strasbourg? Was it a mass psychological breakdown, a strange poison, or something we still don't understand? Let us know your theories in the comments below, and if you love solving history's craziest mysteries, make sure to like and subscribe for more.